Hello, everybody. You're just seeing me. Haha. I wanted to get the ball rolling here. I am meant to be joined by Anthony Mattis, and he is having a lot of technical problems. So I just wanted to hop on here and let you guys know you're in the right place at the right time. And Anthony is doing his darndest to get on. Let's everything that we can all be or do to contribute to Anthony getting on this stream today for this live. Welcome to Mental Disorders and Entities. I am Shannon O'Hara, founder and creator of Talk to the Entities. Hopefully, I'm going to be joined by Anthony Mattis, who is a Talk to the Entities facilitator, who is battling his technology right now to get on this stream. So I'm going to gently and slowly start and see if hopefully Anthony can hop on and join us. I'm just conferring that can he hop on here now that we're live? Okay.
You'll see him down here when he does.
Okay, brilliant. So welcome again to Mental Disorders and Entities. This is a open and free conversation for a very controversial topic, which is obviously well, entities is its own controversial topic. And then we have mental diagnoses, we'll call them. And these are, schizophrenia, bipolar, multiple personality, just to name a few. Mental Disorders and Entities is a Talk to the Entities specialty class that I facilitated many years ago to really bring this conversation forward about people's awarenesses of entities, and that was a valid and real thing that was occurring when a lot of people are talking about hearing voices. So obviously this is I would say this is like the most charged topic that I talk about in Talk to the Entities, at least I think so. It's definitely the one where people are going to be the most defensive of the diagnoses of this reality. For what if people who say that they hear voices actually are hearing voices and they're the voices of entities? And so my motto with this topic has always been, let's educate, not medicate. And if you're just hopping on this live, welcome, welcome, welcome. You probably were expecting to see two people. Anthony Mattis is trying his darndest to get on to this live. He's having some real technical problems. So I just thought I would start with you guys and let's contribute all the energy that we can to Anthony getting himself onto this live with us. Because he has, so Anthony is a Talk to the Entities facilitator and has a lot of really firsthand experience dealing with a mental diagnoses. His first wife was diagnosed as a schizophrenic and subsequently took her own life. And he has had a lot of experience with recognizing the symptoms of entity awareness. And really, Talk to the Entities is a holistic curriculum designed to empower people who are entity sensitive. So that's me. And chances are, if you're here listening to this, or you're ever listening to this, or you're drawn to listen to this at all, you have entity sensitivity too. And that is not a wrongness, that is a strongness. What would it take for all of us that hear entities, talk to entities, see entities, perceive entities, to, number one, not react to it as a wrongness and actually include it as the strength of possibility and the inclusion of all awareness that it can be? Yeah. So like everywhere you've made yourself wrong, or everywhere somebody else has made you wrong, or like verbally or non-verbally like projected like that you're crazy if you talk about entities, bring up the topic of entities, or have any curiosity around entities, all that stuff that you bought around what it meant if you were aware of entities, will you destroy and uncreate all that? There's a very like anti-entity energy that goes on in the world. Like, we're not supposed to talk about it. And if you see entities or hear entities or work with entities, that you're crazy. But like, you're not crazy. I am a very entity sensitive person, and it and the Talk to the Entities curriculum was developed through my journey of learning how to be empowered and work with entities rather than have it dictate and control my life. I think Anthony might be here. Oh, he made it. So how do I add him, honey?
Let's go on here.
You're welcome.
Say something. Let's see if we can hear you, Anthony.
Hey, can you hear me?
Just barely. It might be on my end. I'm so glad you made it.
I'm so glad. Sorry, you guys. And I was prepared.
Well, I was just warming everybody up and giving them an introduction to mental disorders and entities, and also something that everybody, most of you guys wouldn't know this, but as a Talk to the Entities facilitator, we have a lot of technical issues with online entity classes because the entity activity can just sometimes be so strong. And this topic is one that is hugely controversial and equally liberating. So it's just dealing with all of the activity, all the energy, and all of the possibilities and change that we're going to create.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Do you want to tell your story a little bit, Anthony? Of why you're sort of uniquely qualified to deal with and facilitate on this topic?
Yeah, well, my wife, my kid's mother, she had bipolar disorder.
Bipolar. Okay, yeah. I said schizophrenia. My mistake.
Well, she may have had schizophrenia towards the end because it got so bad, but they were talking about paranoid schizophrenia towards the end, right before she decided to take her own life. But when I met her, it was interesting. It was like she told me her whole life story within the first 15 minutes, and she was so intelligent and beautiful, and the type of person you can talk for hours and hours and hours and never get bored. But I remember, talk about the fifth element. I remember like saying to myself, I don't know if I want to help her or date her. And I'm like,
and you settled for marrying her.
I said, yeah, and making babies. But I underestimated. Again, this is all before access, so I underestimated mental illness and the level of intensity that comes with it. And so when she took her own life, I literally was on my knees. I was just getting out of the church. I was in my church phase then. Before that, we had a guru. Before that, we did metaphysics. And so she would be well for a while with no meds. And then her mom had killed herself. Her mom had struggled with chronic depression, had electric shock treatment, and she shot herself in the heart. And that set her off. And that was my wife off about a year later. She just kind of like lost her shit.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to the therapist, I'm like, it's like there's a demon in there. I don't even know my wife. And the therapist is like, well, that's the nature of the illness. And I'm like, okay, but like, can you fucking tell me like what switched off in the brain?
Yeah.
And so fast forward when she decided to kill herself, and I remember saying to her right before we were in the hospital, sitting on the roof, it was like a caged fence, like for pigeons, but only for the people that were institutionalized there. And I'm like, why are you trying to kill yourself? You're totally against this thing. And she's like, there's a demon. And I'm like, okay, where? Running around the house? We'll just clear the house and blah, blah, blah. In the name of Jesus. And because that's what we were doing at the time. And she's like, no, the demon's inside of me. And I remember I just about jumped out of my chair in the hospitals, all these inmates walking around, and talk about being in a beyond. And I'm like, well, if there's a fucking demon inside there, then what's the point of being a Christian? Because the Bible says if you wear the breastplate of armor and you accept Jesus and have the faith of the mustard seed, which is only about that big. And I knew she loved God this much, and I'm like, if there's a demon in there, I'm like, let's just go and start our own religion, is exactly what I said to her. And she's like, no, let's not do that. And I said, you realize if you kill the demon, you go for the ride too, right? Like, and the kids won't have a mother. Is that what you want? She's like, no. And at this point, she was almost like completely catatonic. It took her probably 15 minutes before she could even like tell me what color the sky was. And so she was able to convince everybody in the hospital that she was okay to go home. And she promised little Aria that that she wasn't going to leave. And about a week later, she left. You know, she checked herself into a hotel, took a bunch of sleeping pills, and she checked out. And the only note there was the day before, she actually said to me, she's like, I don't want you and the kids to go through this like I did growing up with my mom. And I remember saying to her, I'm like, I'll deal with one bad year for 5.5 good ones, because she gave me 5.5 good years of sobriety and sanity without drugs or anything. And the doctors wouldn't even believe me. They're like, it's not possible, not with the kind of bipolar she has. But we were working on our stuff constantly. And so the next day she took her life and went to sleep. And I remember I had this conversation with God, so to speak. And the church at the time said it was my fault because I was studying all this other energy work, not even access. And I opened up the door to the devil, and that's why she got sick again. But I would have believed them, but she was actually getting sick before I was studying any kind of energy work anyway. So
Right. But we have to ask the question, was she actually sick?
Well, I'm just using the term before I got to access. No, I mean, fast forward, I'm like, God, I'm going outside the box. If I go to hell for it, so be it. 9 months later, I learned about access consciousness. And then fast forward, maybe about a year and a half later is when I went to my first talk to the entities class. Now, I couldn't receive it for shit. I'll be honest with you. But the boys were in the front row. My sons were probably like 11 and 9. And they're like, best class ever, Dad. We got to go back. And my daughter was like sitting between my legs. They didn't say anything. And I just wanted you to talk to my dead wife, you know? I'm like, tell me why she killed herself. And I already knew the answer. And it wasn't until about 2 years later, Shannon, where I actually, my third time I took the beginner's talk to the Andy's class with you. And all of a sudden I started hearing it and getting it. And I started having awarenesses of what she was going through. And there were times where she would appear in classes like energetically. And what she would show me was, I remember at Dane's Symphony of Possibilities class, he had done a session on me. And after it was over, she sort of like showed up and she's like, whatever the energy is that you guys are getting to in access consciousness matches the energy of mental illness, and it could actually melt it away. And I just started to weep because I'm like, damn, I really wanted her to have a body and to be able to take her through access. And so here we are. I come to learn, when you kept talking about awareness symptoms, she was one of the most aware people I'd ever known.
Yeah.
You know, so that's kind of like the story. And from then on, I've always said we could change the face of mental illness, but the person ultimately has to choose on the planet here with these tools.
Exactly. And thank you for sharing that. And maybe some of you guys listening have known people like this, have been somebody who's struggled with pretty severe stuff. And this topic, it's a weird juxtaposition because I have so much bliss around talking about this stuff. Like, I really like getting into the hard, difficult areas because, like, I was deeply suicidal and hearing voices and basically ready to check out until I said yes to the entities. And that's the trigger right there. It's the yes, I will talk to the entities. Even though I feel crazy, even though I think I'll be judged as a freak, it was that yes, I will talk to the entities that was the deciding factor between me becoming highly medicated, institutionalized, and ultimately taking my own life, or becoming highly happy, highly successful, and capable of empowering many people to choose something different if they so wish. So like and what I love about this is like when your wife was talking about there's a demon in me, it's like, we're like, great, we got the tools for that. Let's get to work. And of course, don't you wish you had those tools, the tools you have now then? Yeah. And everything works out. Everything works the way it's really supposed to work. So let's talk a little bit about, or would you talk a little bit about if somebody came to you now and was talking about like, there's a demon in me, like, let's give some people some tools. Like, what would you do? How would you educate?
Well, I would ask them, who does this belong to? It's one of the first questions we learn, even in the Access Bars class. It's to ask for every thought, feeling, and emotion you have, 99% of the time, it does not belong to you. That's pretty much almost always. And that was a hard concept for me to wrap my head around. But the longer I've been in Access, I'm like, oh my God. And I would just start asking questions. It's like if they came in right off the bat with no Access background, I would actually start running their bars. I would also ask them if they were a portal. I mean, sometimes I just like to jump in. In fact, I have one of my best friends from chiropractic school has a son who's only 7 years old, and he throws in the suicide thing. He's received a couple of concussions, and he's like, I want to kill myself. I want to end my life. I can't handle my concussion.
Okay. So actually, this is the second time you've brought this energy up. So obviously it wants to be talked about here, and let's do that. And then somebody else also brought in a question: where is the line between talking to entities and being abused by entities? And we'll definitely get into that
Yeah.
in the time that we have. But please, everybody, recognize that this is a very brief, free conversation
Yeah.
that is segueing to a very dynamic and highly kind of simplified but complex area. And Anthony and I are doing a class on this. So if this is something that you need to know more about, you want to learn more about, like, please check out the class. Okay. This thing of I want to kill myself. So there is such a thing as demons. They are entities, right? So there is an entity kingdom, and it's full of a diverse, wide range of entities, just like the plant kingdom, the microbiology kingdom, the animal genus, phylum, and species. There is an entity kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And demons are part of the entity kingdom. And they're a particular kind of entity that's just really, really mean. And their job is to maintain anti-consciousness and unconsciousness, period. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole point. That's their whole job. They're to maintain unconsciousness and anti-consciousness. So, and they also do this, they're very effective and they're really good at triggering people to either want to kill themselves or to kill other people. So if you're hearing, like, you should kill yourself or you should kill so-and-so, you want to be like, it's a demon. And the way that we clear demons, Anthony, do you want to do that for us?
Yeah. So the way that we clear demons is to do it in the old English vernacular, which is return to from whence you came, never to return to me, my body, my family, my home, this reality again. Return to from whence you came, never to return to me, my body, my home, my family, this reality again. And you can just keep doing it until you feel like a release or a lightening up. And you may have to do it for some days. A lot of people like to put these clearings on loops, and I'm in favor of loops, but you really have to actually be present with the clearings yourself, because there's something to be said about, like, when you're actually saying it and engaging and returning them from whence they came. There's something very empowering about that, because some people will not do that and just have it running on a loop in the background. And I'm like, not enough. You guys need to engage.
Not enough. I like that. So the phenomenon that we're basically talking about is we generally put it under the category of entity clearing.
Mm-hmm.
So there are sort of like four main principles. There are four main principles in Talk to the Entities, which is clearing. And that's like the first tool you learn. You also learn it in the Access Foundation class. And this entity clearing method, it was taught to me by my dad, Gary Douglas. And it is the entity clearing method of Access Consciousness that we use in Talk to the Entities. So you clear all sorts of entities. And OMG, does that make the world a lighter, brighter, easier place in space? And you also can clear demons. In fact, you should clear demons. My advice would be, don't talk to the demons. They will always be those frenemies. They'll be like, don't you love us so much? No one loves you as much as I love you. You need me. Like, our relationship is the most deep, meaningful relationship you'll ever have. Like, the demons are just linking into all those emotional needs. And they are so willing to be so manipulative just to maintain their control. Like, good for them, but also, like, isn't it great that we can clear demons? And the thing that is I'm going to say this, even though I'm not sure how usable this is going to be for people, but I want it to be on the record. The thing that makes it possible for demons to attach to you, to connect to you, to hook into you in any way is that you have to have a judgment of you. if you had no judgment, especially if you had no judgment of you, demons would be like completely irrelevant. And I needed to indicate this because this has to be a conversation about how you are choosing, you are not the victim of. And so this circles back to this question that was sent in, where's the line between talking to entities and being abused by entities? The question I love to ask people is like, where's the line between talking to people and being abused by people?
Yeah, exactly.
It's the
the
same.
same.
Yeah, it's the exact same. So if you're really good at like handling abusive people, you're going to be really good at handling abusive entities. But if you're like somebody who's like totally falls prey to gaslighting all the time and like is like lets yourself be totally disempowered and like disrespected by other people, you're going to tend to do that with entities too. So it's really not that thing about like talking to entities versus like being abused by entities. That's more of like a life skill. First master it with people and then repurpose that for your relationships with entities.
Yeah. The reverse kind of happened for me, to believe it or not, is like the more I started to receive the tools that we learned, I started to have an easier time with people, with bodies.
Yeah. Okay, I love that. You know what? I love that because my dad oftentimes, Gary has this motto where he says everything he ever learned, he learned from a horse. But for me, it's totally different. It's sort of like everything I learned, I really learned from like entities and like how to deal with entities. And it did also make me much better at dealing with people. Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, total gift. And trust me, I struggled with receiving the tools mainly because I didn't think it was for me. I didn't think I had a capacity in this area. And I got over that. It took me a long time to get over that point of view. But it just when I finally was like willing to be present with the tools, I started to realize like what my ways are to be aware of the spirit world. I don't know if I'd ever set up a shop as a psychic healer or something like that, or you know what I mean, or like a medium. But it's like with the tools, I'm able to change almost anything, which is really fucking cool.
Exactly. And it's really at this point, it's like the psychic medium shop isn't really as effective as the empowering of people to know that they know and to recognize like, so people basically, anybody that's got like a mental diagnosis, whether you're diagnosed or not, or you hear voices, or you basically think you're crazy. So there's a huge scale of I just gave you guys like everywhere on the scale, right? You could be over the edge, right? Fully suicidal, fully like completely at the effect of entities. That's like the extreme end. And then you could be on the other end, which is just sort of like low grade feeling crazy and wrong, right? Which I would say probably, if we took like a vote of everyone who's listening to this right now, everyone's going to fall somewhere in that scale. And the first step on the, mental disorders and entities freedom path is to number one, acknowledge that you are in fact dealing with entities. That's the first step. This is actually entities. This isn't you making it up. This isn't you being crazy. This isn't you like fantasizing. This could potentially be, yes, you could be embellishing. Yes, you could be in reaction. Yes, you could be inventing based on a lot of your awareness. And the first sort of question to go to is like, okay, is this entities? If you hear yes, it's entities. If you hear yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, that's entities too. So what else would you love people to know about this topic? Because you facilitate quite a few. You have facilitated more mental disorders and entities classes than I have.
Have I? Really? It's so funny.
Probably. I've only done one. I did the one class that started it, and then.
Yeah, I tried to get it going, but I think, when people see the title, maybe because they don't think it pertains to them, it's like they don't need the class. But to me, it just gives people a lot of information about your awareness, whether have mental illness or, been diagnosed with mental illness or not. It's just more information and awareness of how you could use these tools and explore who does this belong to a much, much deeper level. And you talked about the range from like low grade melancholia to extreme, paranoid schizophrenia, and a lot of us are in between. And so And a lot of the things that we learn when we first come to Access is to really explore who does this belong to for not only your thoughts, feelings, and emotions, but even your physical stuff.
So when you say who does it belong to in this context, how does that pertain to the entity stuff?
Um, well, I'll remember when I just got back from facilitating an entities class, and most of my life I was pretty much deeply melancholic. I wouldn't say I was depressed to the point where I thought about killing myself. I was always sort of like too scared to die. Um, but I remember like I finally started getting happy in Access, like or just in my life and because of the tools of Access. And I'm finally traveling the world, fulfilling all my dreams, actual blah blah blah. And all of a sudden I start to feel like that energy of heaviness in my world. So I started going, who does this belong to? And then I wasn't even being present with it. I'm like, return to sender with consciousness attached. But I wasn't even like present with the question. I was just doing it like almost like a formula and a mantra. Because I didn't think I had entity capacities, which is funny because I was a facilitator at this point of Talk to the Entities. Because I'm like, oh, that's not for me. I'm just going to facilitate this stuff. And then I remember looking at Julia, my present wife, and I'm like, I'm getting really low and I'm sorry. So just ignore me. And she actually encouraged me. She's like, what if, and I'm like, I feel like I'm going to die is what I said. And she's like, well, what if you go ahead and just die? I'm like, no, I couldn't die. I'm too scared. She's like, just go for it. So I actually got super present with that idea. And then all of a sudden, three people, and then I started remembering all the things you would say about you got to go with that lightning quick first impression that comes in right after you ask a question. So I'm like, who does this belong to? Because setting it to my parents with consciousness attached wasn't working anymore. And then all of a sudden, once I actually got present, three people that I knew who had committed suicide, they just sort of popped up in my field of vision. So I actually started talking with them, like, because the clearing thing wasn't working. So I spent some time doing that. And then all of a sudden I started thinking about the Aboriginals in the area where I live, because we have built a new house here, brand new house. So we had to knock down a lot of trees. So, a lot of nature spirits, the spirits of the earth, so on and so forth. And my daughter was learning about the Native Americans in the area. So I started having a conversation with them, not clearing them. This took about 40 minutes and I kind of fell asleep doing it. But I remember perceiving like, it was almost like neural pathways were forming in my brain. It was so interesting. And I remember waking up the very next day and that intense melancholia was gone like that. It was like I had a brand new brain. And that was when it really clicked for me, where I was like, oh my God, what if that melancholia is sort of like the way my body and sort of brain inform me that there may be some entities around that are struggling. And from that moment on, like my capacities started exponentializing. And then someone invited me to actually facilitate an entities class in the hometown that I grew up in. And it was so interesting, where I was like really super melancholic as a teenager, especially. But I thought it was because of life circumstances why I was always sad. And I remember being super happy. I'm driving to class and I'm like, wow, I forgot how beautiful it is to live up in this area. It's kind of close to where Grace lives. Like, it's not too far from where Grace lives, but just on the New Jersey side. Anyway, and in an instant, Shannon, like my happiness went like that. And I'm like, and it felt like when I was like in high school, like that melancholia darkness. But in an instance, I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Who is this? And I'm like, all right, is this an entity? And I got, yes. I'm like, how many? And it was like, boof.
Yeah.
And once again, it was the natives again. And I remember like, I started apologizing. Like, we never really learned a lot about you guys. And I just started I don't know, it was like everything started to bleed time in that instant.
Yeah.
And I started seeing teepees everywhere. And I just had a conversation with them. And within 3 to 5 minutes, Shannon, it was gone. I changed it in an instant. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of how it started showing up for me.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, because that's essentially, so the first tool that we educate on in Talk to Entities is clearing entities, and then the second one is talking to entities, hence the name Talk to the Entities. And it's these scenarios, it's these I mean, the thing that I find really fascinating about your story, but also I've experienced it like a cajillion times, is like literally as soon as I actually get present and start using the tools and communicating, 5 minutes later, the whole universe has shifted.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than living a whole lifetime at the effect of entity awareness. So that's what we really hope to educate about to those of you guys that choose to come along to mental disorders and entities. It is, it's, I would say it's like one of those topics. It's not like a relationship class or a money class where it's sort of like, it's sort of okay to talk about it. And it's sort of, it's like this more approved of positive topic. Mental disorders entities is touching onto a level of power and potency and capacity in humanoids that has been so heavily judged and manipulated and made wrong. It's like, how many lifetimes have you been aware of entities and capable of an inclusive entity attitude? In fact, loved many entities and worked with them and cooperated with them, but you were, heavily judged, heavily condemned, or harmed or executed for that capacity. So we really need to bring this dynamic ability out of the wrong box and get it into the strong box. So, and Anthony, really one of the first things that Anthony said when he hopped on, which is like so like the most relevant thing, is that you can have all these tools, but somebody really needs to choose. And that's one of the things that I've come across so many times with people in this area when I'm working with people who do have diagnoses. The majority of them are not willing to be the strongest entity in the equation. Yeah. So they end up being at the effect of a lot of entities. So you really have to choose to be, greater than everything that's out there. And this is a huge conversation. It's a huge journey. It's a massively empowering, terrifying, exciting possibility.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I mean, gosh, I'm honored that you've invited me to be part of this creation, because it's like, I feel like, like a knight on a horse being like, let's fucking do this.
Well, exactly. And it's like, I love that you bring sort of real world, a real experience that a lot of people can relate to, unfortunately, to this conversation. I myself was made crazy. I made myself crazy around awareness. And then very early on, since I was blessed with access from a very young age, I sort of learned how to repurpose all of this wrongness into an incredible strongness. Mm-hmm. So those of you guys that have found us, and those of you guys that made your way here, you might have something pretty strong about you that you think is pretty wrong about you. Mm-hmm. Actually, let's sort of address this one last question from Annalie before we finish today. Do you have any advice for how to be with a loved one diagnosed with mental disorder and hearing voices, but who is not open to access tools talking about entities?
Yeah, right. Oh my. Well, the only thing I can say about that is, even during the time, even when she was at her worst, it's like I had to also take care of me. I had to make sure that I was not sort of being consumed by whatever was eating her up, because if I went down, then the whole family was fucked, basically. And so there's only so much you could do at the end, in the end of it. It's like they actually have to have that demand in their universe. And it's probably one of the most frustrating. Sometimes you feel this sense of powerlessness when you watch someone you deeply care about just going down. And there's ultimately nothing that you can do about it if they're not vested in changing it themselves. But at that time, she, once she had the point of view that Jesus abandoned her or God abandoned her and she was damaged goods, she was hopeless. And so what I would do is, now, let's say I had talked to the entities, I'd probably be running clearings in the background, and I would be using these tools like, man, because these tools empowered me. You know, it's like I would be in the face of these demons and clearing them, especially the oaths and vows too. I love that clearing as well. That's always part of my demon clearings, destroying the uncreating all the oaths and vows, because as infinite beings, we've been and done everything. And in this lifetime, we bring in a lot of baggage with us from other lifetimes. So I would make sure I would handle my part and do whatever I can for the person I love. But ultimately, I can only handle my piece in all of this. And I had to look at my demons. Not that I was an evil guy or anything like that, but just from other lifetimes. I talked to Gary about it. And Shannon, there were times where like there were exorcisms literally taking place with Arya, my daughter, the youngest, while using the tools of access. We were talking about it this morning, as a matter of fact, her and I, in the car. She's like, yeah, she's like, that was pretty amazing, clearing those demons out of me. But I believe without a shadow of a doubt that we stopped, if you will, the generational curse from going down to the next generation with what I've been able to do with the kids.
That's so freaking cool, Anthony. I love hearing that. And I totally agree. And wow, that just gives me such shivers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is definitely one direction. It's sort of like how to be with your loved ones who are demonstrating or experiencing some sort of diagnoses. There's that aspect of it, of the class, that we will be able to address. And then there's also the actual dealing with if you are the bearer of that. So, and the thing, what I love so much about Access is like, makes life so much lighter. But like, the thing is like, can you save, or can you, what's going to work better, saving or empowering? And how many of you guys have tried to, I mean, Annalie is also indicating like they're not open. Like that's where she's putting it. They're not open, right? So that's setting you up for basically like, okay, so like what is possible? What if you were willing to let them suffer and make the choices that they need to make? And I love what Anthony added, and take care of you.
Yeah, and be the bigger entity in the house. If they live in your home, like be the bigger fucking entity. And you said before the hashtag boss entity. You be the boss entity, and do what you can.
And that's exactly right. And that's the big ask. And that's the top of the mountain where we're going. It's like you being the most dominant entity. Now, what it takes for you to be that, to have that, to trust that power in yourself, that's the journey. So we look forward to playing with all of you that show up for mental disorders and entities. It's going to be sort of like the next evolution of the power of this possibility. And we will record this knowledge for all future people who are looking to be educated rather than medicate themselves into oblivion. So thank you all so much for joining us. Anthony, is there anything that you want to add before we finish?
No, that was beautiful. I'm looking forward to this.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.